Okay, so the original recording just cut on us, and we were going to do part 2, but looks like when I transferred the file, it's pretty long. So this is either going to be part 2 or this might be part 4, 3 or 4, depending on how I upload the video. It'll be whatever it's going to be. But here we are where he's talking about viruses. Let's hear it one more time.
Cells in your endothelium. This is why you start bleeding. Viruses, if you think about a virus, it has a layer on it. Outside of it is called glycoproteins. Inside of that is the RNA, which is the nucleic acids, which go into your cell and take over your cell machinery.
Now, the way he just described that with his finger motions and everything was just like, you know, almost identical to this Professor Dave video. So I'm going to play that one more time.
Just genetic material in a protein casing. There is no membrane, no organelles, not much of anything we are used to seeing in living creatures. Nevertheless, viruses reproduce by injecting their genetic material into a host cell, thereby hijacking the cellular machinery of the cell and forcing it to make copies of the virus instead of what the cell would normally be doing.
That is utterly ridiculous. I mean, when you watch this video, it's so ridiculous. But hold on just a second. Josh is calling me on the other line. Let me see what's up here. What's up, Paco?
Oh, I didn't. Wait, why are you answering his phone?
Because I'm making a video right now. I just turned over to grab your call. What's up? I'm in the process of making a video with Brian.
Yeah, what are you doing with those beans in the pot?
I'm cooking. We're going to make turkey and bean burritos. We'll be ready in a couple hours.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Excuse me, it's only for my and me.
Are you there? Are you there, Brian? Hello?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I should start this video or not because now everybody knows what I'm eating for dinner. They know what my wife wants to eat for dinner. My son just called and I took the call, but that's fine. Everybody knows a little about my life, right? So, all right. Okay, so let's hear the rest of what Shiva's saying here.
But when that happens, the pieces of the outside, the glycoproteins, you know, they're like the shedding hair. They go settle all different places.
Which, again, we can ask them, how do you know they go settle in all different places? But let's go.
Now, in the case of Ebola, these essentially go into the arterial endothelium.
What essentially goes? See, he didn't explain that.
He's saying the pieces of the glycoprotein of the virus is what he's saying. He's saying the RNA, it injects its RNA into the cell, and then the rest of the cell doesn't get in. I mean, the rest of the virus doesn't get into the cell, but breaks apart and flies all over the place and lands on arterial cells.
Right, that's what he's saying, that they go somewhere else. So that doesn't make sense either, but let's see what he says now.
Endothelial, which is in your arteries, in your heart cells, in your endothelium. This is why you start bleeding outside, which you start basically, you know, bleeding from inside, and that occurs because your own cytokines go over to that arterial endothelial cells and they start killing it. Now in corona...
That makes no sense.
Wait a second. Here. Hold on. So, pieces of the glycoprotein, which I guess the body doesn't want, and so it sends these cytokines over to zap.
Right. Yeah, and it's so utterly ridiculous what he's saying to me because, yeah, that's essentially what he's saying. Josh is calling me again, but I'm not going to take it. I just told him I'm making a video here. That's exactly what I hear him saying is that, you know, a virus injects its...
It's not that they go and engulf the glycoprotein particles and carry them out of the body. They go zap the glycoproteins that are hanging on to the arterial walls, and thus it destroys the arterial walls?
Exactly. That's what he's making it sound like, as if, you know, let's visualize it. This is what I hear. Tell me if you hear it the same way. He's sitting here trying to give some graphic concept of using his hands and saying, okay, here's a virus. And then he's doing the whole, you know, Squidward raising his back and injecting its RNA into a cell. So that in itself is another issue of a cell getting, damaged supposedly from some injection of a cell.
Well, here's my analogy: is it's kind of like saying that an ant, which is dead, a tiny little ant which is dead, walks up to an elephant, injects itself into the elephant, and forces the elephant to replicate itself until the elephant explodes.
Well, even more than that, if I use that example and elaborate on what you're saying, it's as if he's saying an ant went into an elephant's mouth.
It's dead, though.
An ant crawled up an elephant's ass, okay? And,
But the ant's dead.
and it died. Yeah. No, and in fact, it didn't because it was never alive. Okay, a dead ant was flying in the wind, and an elephant sucked it in with its trunk. And when the dead ant was inside of the elephant, that dead ant went over to one of the elephant's cells and injected its own DNA into the elephant's cell. But then the rest of the ant blew up, and that ant that blew up went over and got on the elephant's lungs. And then the elephant's lungs, the elephant's immune system went over and started blasting all the particles that were on the lungs, and therefore the elephant started bleeding out of the lungs because the body was destroying its own lungs.
Wait a minute. Okay, so this virus is 500 times smaller than a bacteria, and part of it is going to break off, go over to an arterial wall, and affect that wall.
Right. Look, folks who are watching this video, if you've watched all 3 or 4, however many videos this is going to be, and you're still with us, I know that you agree with a whole hell of a lot of everything we've had to say, especially if you're a decent human being, if you're a Christian, if you believe in God, if you're a Trump supporter, if you don't like the corrupt state. Hell, we even agree with a lot of what Dr. Shiva is saying here, no doubt, right? Go Dr. Shiva,
Yeah.
He's saying some good stuff. But what Brian and I are getting at here, as you could see even with some of our questions like 380 trillion cells or 380 trillion viruses, how do they come up with these figures? How do they know this stuff? How do they think they know? You can't just believe it because they're telling you, right? So now we're dissecting and we're analyzing even Dr. Shiva's take on what's going on. I'm even pulling up other videos like from Professor Dave on YouTube, which is clearly propaganda video. You can always tell propaganda video the way it's made. It's like, what's that doctor's name or the scientist? What's that scientist guy? Bill Nye, the science guy. Yeah, like Bill Nye, the science guy, real in the industry media, perk, that's getting paid big money to promote propaganda. So that's all we're doing here is we're trying to analyze and make sense of it for ourselves and for you. Okay. So because again, as I'm going to let, as we're on the Mike and Brian show right now, and I'm going to let, Mikhail come over and he wants to say something. You're damn right I want to say something, y'all. That's why you boys are here. Me and Brain, get Brain on the phone. Me and Brain are the executive producers of this here show. Because we want to get the truth out there. We want to make sense of things. There's too much stupidity and idiocy going on in this world. Forget about damn Hollywood and the television and the music and all the my nigga gangster bullshit you were talking about. We know that's all bullshit. We know the foods people are putting in their body is bullshit. We know that. What we're trying to do here is get two bright minds, the two brightest minds on the planet, Mike and Brian, to come in here and do exactly what they're doing right now and dissecting and tearing this stuff apart piece by piece to see what's really going on. Because you can't just go through life believing everything you're told. You can't just go through life believing what they tell you when they come up with astronomical numbers and figures and it sounds all whippy-diffy. It's beyond me. I guess that's like saying I'm just an old redneck. I live out in the woods and I don't know nothing, so I'm just going to listen to whatever you tell me. I'm sorry there. That I'm upsetting your wife, Mike. I know she's over there working. I'm sorry, Moni, honey. I'll be calmed down, but I'm upset right now. Brain?
Okay, relax.
Yeah, Mikhail, you're getting pretty fired up there, and that's good, because this stuff ain't making no sense to me.
I know.
I'm trying to figure it out myself.
I know, and we know Mike and Brian are going to get to the bottom of it. I just wanted to throw that out there. Mike and Brian, get back on this and just straighten it all out for everybody. Okay, we'll do that.
Here, man.
Hey, Brian. Put Brian back on the phone.
Hey.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm here.
Brian, man,
Brian.
Mikael got carried away. He's pretty pissed.
Yeah.
And that's why they're the executive producers of this show. They want us to get to the bottom of this, and that's what we're doing. So, and for you people out there watching the video, that's the whole point. Brian and I are trying to make sense of what doesn't make sense. So,
And this is not making sense.
no, it's not making sense.
We could be like most people and just say, it's too complicated for us. Let's just accept it.
Right,
You know, but
right. We could
we
be
don't wanna do
like
that.
the sheep, but we're not that way. So let's back it up. Let's give Dr. Shiva another opportunity. Let's see what he has to say here. He's gonna. In fact, I'm gonna back up a little more than that. Let's see what he has to say here. Come on.
All right.
Those underlying conditions by by peoples whose systems have been weakened by the different areas that I just gave you a glimpse of. So when the immune system is compromised, you have a cytokine storm. All these other chemicals start.
Okay, so we can go with that, right? We can go with people's immune systems being, shot because of all the sugar and the junk and the alcohol and everything in their system. So their immune system is going haywire. Their body, their chemistry's off. Everything Shiva's saying about that is fine, right? We're good with that.
All the fluids and hormones are kind of out of balance, and that they don't really work well together.
Right, everything's out of balance, not working right. So now he's saying because of that, these glycosines are just going haywire. It's a storm, right? Let's hear.
Start raging to try to make up for the fact that the other subsystems have failed.
Okay, so they're trying to make up for the fact that the other subsystems have failed. So now they're kicking into overdrive. Like, hey man, things aren't working right, man. Let's go kick ass on viruses and keep things going. Okay, so let's see what happens.
I hope that's clear. Very simple stuff. Your body
Yeah, that is a simple concept. Okay.
tries to be in balance. Your body is tries to protect you. So it unleashes these cytokines. It basically starts firing off missiles everywhere to saying, oh my God, I got to protect Bob. Okay.
Now again, we just have to assume that how do they know there's cytokines and what are cytokines and how do they see those and where do those come from? And then aside from the cytokines, he says they're firing off missiles. But of course, he's not going to get into what they're firing off. What are they? Are they literally firing missiles, Mr. Shiva? I mean, are the cytokines themselves like firing off like I remember back, in the 70s when, the only video games we had were Space Invaders, and it's shooting little, I mean, is that what's happening? I mean, is it literally shooting off missiles or is that just you're trying to graphically illustrate, what are you trying to graphically illustrate? What? Or, are they...
If they're shooting off missiles, how do they avoid the 60 trillion bacteria?
That's another good point. Brian just made up a beautiful point. If you're a profound thinker, as Brian and myself are, there's 380. Well, forget about the 380 trillion viruses that they got to know which ones to shoot at. But what about the 6 trillion human cells? And are they only gonna are they going to destroy all the human cells? Or are they going to destroy only some human cells, and why? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I mean, again, why would they shoot something and not just engulf it?
Right. Good. Thank you for saying that, Brian, because this goes back to the point I made earlier. What the only thing that does make sense, and I'll tell you, on the website, thebigvirushoax.com, it can't get any clearer than the way it's explained there. That there's simply a process called phagocytosis where the cells use their membranes to engulf cell debris in the body, and then that goes hand in hand with Tom Barnett's video that once they do engulf those cells, it creates a solvent, essentially, because they're being broken down and creating a toxin in the cell, and that's so that the cells can carry them out of the body, whether it's to burn them off with a fever or to piss them out or to shit them out or diarrhea them out or vomit them out. They're getting carried out of the body. That would be the natural process. But let's go back to Fantasyland with cells shooting off missiles and see what kind of sense we can make out of it here.
Not only cells. I don't think talking about cells or what was it? Proteins. Cytokines are nothing but proteins, aren't
Right.
they? Right?
I'll back up just a little bit one more time. Let's hear this one more time.
Okay.
Those underlying conditions by by people whose systems have been weakened by the different areas that I just gave you a glimpse of. So when the immune system is compromised, you have a cytokine storm. All these other chemicals start raging to try to make up for the fact that the other subsystems have failed. I hope that's clear. Very simple stuff. Your body tries to be in balance. Your body is tries to protect you. So it unleashes these cytokines. It basically starts firing off missiles everywhere to saying, oh my God.
Okay, so maybe he's saying that when the body releases the phytokines, those are the missiles. So the body, it's not that the cytokines are firing off missiles, it's the body releases these cytokines, so the body's releasing the cytokines. It's those are the missiles that are being fired off. So that's the defense system. That's like, let's call them T cells, B cells, cytokines, whatever. It's part of the immune system.
I got to protect Bob, okay? And as a part of that, what happens, this cytokine storm, these chemicals go and start attacking your own tissues.
Okay, so now he's indicating that these cytokines that the body is producing or firing off to protect itself, they go and start attacking the body's own tissues.
So by way of example, in Ebola...
So as an example, in Ebola, for example...
the cytokines start because, by the way, just to give you a visual understanding...
Now, it's interesting that he stopped there because I could see where he was going to be at a dead end. The cytokines are firing off missiles and going all over the place, so theoretically they'd be attacking every part of the body. And I think he realized he was on a dead end there, so he's trying to kind of trip us up here with, oh, by the way, and now let's talk about viruses. So watch how now there's a flaw in what he says, because now he says that the virus injects itself into a cell, but then the virus, breaks into pieces, and those pieces of the cell go and attack different areas. So it's like he's putting two...
I'm looking at cytokines again on the Google search, but it says cytokine is derived from a combination of two words, cyto meaning cell and kinos meaning movement. Cytokines are cell signaling molecules that aid cell-to-cell communication. So are they attacking? And then further down here it says cytokines are compounds produced by the body's immune system that attack and remove foreign bodies. But over here it says there's cell-to-cell communication.
Right, so there's...
Makes sense.
No, that's another contradiction. Please repeat that and say both very clearly and as loud as you can. Go ahead.
Okay, the first cytokine is cyto meaning cell and kinos meaning movement, cell movement. Cytokines are cell signaling molecules that aid cell-to-cell communication. And this other thing says cytokines are compounds produced by the body's immune system that attack and remove foreign bodies.
Well, there you go. So that's another potential contradiction. We have pointed out how there's a lot of contradictions when you start looking at trying to understand even viruses. There's contradictions from one paragraph to the next, and even contradictions within a single sentence. So Brian has indicated you're finding one definition of a cytokine being, a substance that helps cells communicate with one another. And another is saying that cytokines are...
attack and remove foreign bodies.
The cytokines attack and remove. Now, that's interesting to say remove, because that goes back to the whole phagocytosis, where cell membranes engulf cell debris and remove it from the body. So as far as attacking, that would go to his analogy of them being like missiles that are going off. So that could be, again, okay, so maybe the cytokines play a dual role. Maybe they're cells that help communicate between cells, but then when something's not going right, they get triggered off to go do a mission, and attack. They get triggered off like missiles. They're the missiles that are now going over to, bad places.
But again, cytokines is any group of small, short-lived proteins that are released by one cell to regulate the function of another cell. That's another definition.
So we got a third definition now. All the same spelling on all of them, right?
Oh, yeah. Cytokine.
So what's the third definition?
Cytokine, any of a group of small, short-lived proteins that are released by one cell to regulate the function of another cell, thereby serving as intercellular chemical messengers.
Okay, and that could be, link up with the first definition, right? That it's something that helps the communication between two cells.
Right.
So
right.
Not necessarily a third definition. And again, if we go with the assumption that they have two roles, like I can be a husband and I can also be a father, right? So let's go with the assumption that they are helping with communication between cells, but they're also fired off to go attack when there's a problem in the body. So and this is where he said, now before we go further, because he was starting to talk about how they get fired off like missiles, he says, and then he stopped himself and said, okay, let's talk about viruses.
Well, hang on 1 second.
All right.
If it's a short-lived protein, how does it even move around? I mean, if it's a short-lived protein released by one cell to regulate the function of another cell.
Short-lived, right? So short-lived, and what does that mean? Short-lived. How do they know? Do they watch its lifespan under a scanning electron microscope and determine its age, how long it lives?
But I didn't know proteins were a living thing.
And there you go. There's another one. Is a protein a living thing? I would say not, right?
No.
Right. So they're asserting that proteins, which are non-living things, have the ability to do what living things do. Just like they assert viruses are non-living things, but they can go over, latch onto, attack, penetrate into a cell, and inject itself in there and mass replicate itself, even though it's a non-living thing. So now we got the same thing going on with cytokines.
Okay.
That they're short-living, they're non-living, they're proteins.
Right, and the other thing says it's any of the numerous hormone-like low molecular weight proteins secreted by various cell types.
Right.
Mm.
Right. So,
okay.
And of course, no layperson is going to understand that. And then a person like him, we got to trust him. He's a PhD, MIT. Who knows if he's really even that? This guy could be a bullshitter. He's one of Satan's tools, too, to just confuse people, right? And make people think and believe in something that doesn't exist because really we're all just here on frequency waves, right? And it goes down to a cellular level and that's it. And cells clean up the body with a process, But let's assume... when we get this man on the phone, he'll be able to give us some questions about how you're able to look at even count 380 trillion viruses, let alone, look at them under a electron microscope. We've got some good questions for the man when we do our interview with him.
Okay.
So let's just say, for the sake of moving on here, that, that these are little, microscopic little non-living, building blocks that have abilities to do things on their own. It makes no sense, obviously. Let's move on.
The viruses, if you think about a virus, it has a layer on it. Outside of it is called glycoproteins. Inside of that is the RNA, which is the nucleic acids, which go into your cell and take over your cell machinery.
The way He-Man described that with his ball, and he pulled a line. It looks just like the line that's in the visual from Professor Dave inside of the Squidward. It's like he watched the same video. It's weird, man. Anyway, so he's saying what it does.
But when that happens, the
gotta listen to that again.
Outside of it is called glycoproteins. Inside of that is the RNA, which is the nucleic acids, which go into your cell and take over your cell machine.
Okay, so he's saying nucleic acids is what Squidward is injecting into a cell. So Squidward is injecting into the cell nucleic acids. Look up nucleic acids.
Well, it's actually ribonucleic acids, RNA. And the other thing is, so if a virus is the RNA with the protein sheath around it, that's actually what gets on the doorknobs and the grocery cart handles. Right?
Hold on, I'm looking this up. Nucleic acid, a complex organic substance present in living cells, especially DNA or RNA, whose molecules consist of many nucleotides linked in a long chain. That all sounds like bullshit to me, but a complex organic substance present in living cells, especially DNA or RNA, whose molecules consist of many nucleotides linked in a long chain. And they make it look like DNA, linked in a long chain.
It says here, RNA, complex compound of high molecular weight that functions in cellular protein synthesis and replaces DNA as a carrier of genetic codes in some viruses.
Replaces genetic codes.
DNA as a carrier of genetic codes in some viruses.
Right. So how do we know that they know it carries genetic codes? Because now, not only is the virus 500 times smaller than a bacteria and can only be seen under an electron microscope, you can only see the virus itself under an electron microscope, but now you're going down even further and seeing what's inside of the virus.
Right, the RNA, the ribonucleic acid, and the DNA.
And not only are you going inside of the virus that you can only see with an electron microscope, but you're going inside of it and you're able to see and identify all these variable components that exist inside of it.
Well, it's supposedly only the one thing. Only RNA is inside the virus.
Well, they said it's links. It's like a chain link.
Well, yeah, but that is the RNA.
Nucleotides. Look up nucleotides. Nucleotides. Nucleotides in DNA. Nucleotides. A compound consisting of... Oh, now we move on to nucleoside. From nucleotide, a nucleotide is a compound consisting of a nucleoside linked to a phosphate group. Nucleotides from the basic structural unit of nucleic acid, such as DNA. So now we got a virus that's 500 times smaller than bacteria that you can only see with an electron microscope. Not only can they see that, but they can now see what's inside of the virus, which happens to be a chain of nucleotides. And nucleotides happen to be a compound consisting of nucleosides that are linked to a phosphate group. I mean, they're really getting down in there and seeing what's inside of that virus, aren't they?
How are they working with that nucleotide?
It's another good question, right? How are they working with it? How are they manipulating it? Do they have the proverbial,
Electron tweezers.
Electron tweezers. I love it. Did you hear that, Mikhail? Damn sure did. Say that one more time for me, Brian. Say that one more time.
Oh my God.
Brian, that was good.
Hey, Brian, did you hear that? Scanning, get this, scanning electron tweezers. Hey, Mike, okay, I'm out of here. I know that is funny, isn't it, man? That is funny, Mikhail. Oh, man.
I don't know, it just came to me. I mean, it makes sense. You gotta have.
That's funny. Scanning electron tweezers. So how are they working with these? How are they working with these bacteria, with these viruses? So let's get this right. We're learning some stuff here. So viruses, which my buddy Brian told me years ago don't really exist, and I thought he was nuts. And then I started researching it. Now that we're together researching it further, you can see what we're uncovering. We're uncovering the fact that viruses, you got a guy from MIT, PhD, that's a big title, who has some ability to be able to tell you that there are 380 trillion viruses in your body. And by the way, 1 trillion seconds equals 37,000 years. So just to measure and count 1 trillion viruses, it would take you, if you counted one per second, it would take you 37,000 years to count them.
How would you even count 100 of them if they're under an electron microscope and they're, I guess, in some solution where they're moving around?
Exactly, that's another thing. If a virus, good point, 2 points you made there. If the only way you can see it is through an electron microscope, first of all, how do you see it? Because it's one of 380 trillion. So in other words, you're focusing in on one, because you got to focus in on the one, right?
To see the RNA tied to the deoxy.
And like you said, they're moving around somehow. But then again, they're not alive, but they're moving around. But they're not moving around because they got to be able to zoom in on it, right? So it's just sitting there dead. So it's just sitting there dead. So now they can zoom in on one. And then how do they know what's inside of it? Because I guess they don't have the scanning electron tweezers, right? They don't really have, like, I don't see them looking through an electron microscope, and in their other hand they have a pair of tweezers that are filed down to 500 times smaller, the size of a bacteria.
They would also need an electron scanning scalpel.
That's right, an electron scan. So they need tweezers and a scalpel that's 500 times smaller. At least the tips of them are 500 times smaller than a bacteria, the same size as a virus, so that when they're looking under the scanning electron microscope, they can, and you know what? If they're that small, how much do you have to move your hand to get to it and touch it and move it? You know, if I move too much, I've passed it by about 1 million miles. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing Dr. Shiva has looked into an electron microscope.
I guess so.
I would guess.
Maybe that's why they strategically placed a microscope behind him in the video here. I don't know. But it doesn't look like a scanning electron microscope to me. But
no, because they're about $1 million.
Right. Now I'm beginning to wonder about this Shiva character, you know. But let's carry on. Let's see what he says. He's describing. So he's just described to us a virus, and we just looked up what that all means. And of course, I don't even want to do it, but you know, nucleotides lead to nucleosides, which lead to phosphate groups. What the hell? Let's do it. What is a phosphate group? One more.